I've come to realize that while I've been playing in the Corsair and recording an absolutely epic amount of footage, I mean, I probably have enough footage on my SSD to kind of go for until May, until I need more making videos. It is that much, no joke, probably over 10 hours at this point easily. Every time I think I'm about to go to bed, it's like, but what if we did Gatling guns?
Shield system is hit. Congratulations. Target is destroyed.
Crap.
It has been an interesting experience, when you're kind of about to go to bed on a Saturday night at like 2:15 in the morning, and it's just, no, we can make other changes to this ship. We can change the shields. We can change, well, we don't really need to change the coolers all that much, but we can do this. We can do that. We can do the other thing. Why don't we go and try this? And not only that, when you have other players around who are just like, well, I can go back out. You guys want to go back out? Yeah, I can go back out too. And you just find this cycle repeating over and over and over again. And you're not unhappy with it. You're thinking, oh, this is going to be, this is going to be fun. It kind of explains why, when some people get mad, they're like, how does Chris Roberts still keep getting money? Don't these people understand? It's because even with such limited framework, just this basic ass sandbox that we're playing in that really has no underlying structure, no connective tissue yet, that really kind of drives the whole thing forward and makes it work. It's still so much fun to interact with. This is what highlights the potential, and this is what we always talk about, the potential of Star Citizen, and what makes people kind of go bananas over this game it's those moments like that. When you're sitting there and you're going, oh, this stupid map, it doesn't work. It hasn't worked in years. And why are we still using this? And this inventory system, who thought this was a good idea? It's like they concentrated on the looks of it more than they concentrated on the functionality. I think that there's a lot when you look at a universe like Star Citizen, and this is like a comparison that I've made before. When you look at the moons that we fly over and everything like that, just think about it. You redo the surface of those planets, add vegetation, add some lakes, some water, and this could be, whichever world that you've played an MMO on before. And it would be an amazing leap forward for that game. And realistically, Star Citizen is just a crazy big sandbox right now. There are some basic rules to the universe. There are, kind of guidelines as to how things function. Sometimes they shift a little bit here and there. There's a little bit of framework kind of put in, but largely a lot of the necessary connective tissue to make this a living, breathing MMO is just not there. And so this is when we kind of end up, playing with the whole, well, what if we just did this? What if we just did that? And we start suggesting all these ideas. Here's a little connection that you could make that could actually create a rewarding gameplay loop, that could actually create fun. But then you have to deal with also the problem of persistence, because there's persistence in terms of a coffee cup sitting on the surface of a planet, which we've heard about for ages and ages and ages. And there's persistence of character and persistence of progression, which can be and has been wiped multiple times in the past. Recently, you may remember that CIG made a point in one of their interviews where they were discussing weapons and the lack of variation in the weapons available to ships. If you were to look at certain sizes and classes of weapons on Urkel, you would find that many of the weapons in a certain tier or a certain size have all the same range, have remarkably similar stats. So there's not a lot of variation in weapons at the current time for ships in Star Citizen, right? And the reason behind this, and a legitimate reason, mind you, was for ease of testing and ease of balancing. That is not the way they want it to be in the future, but for right now, they've decided to basically keep it simple and make it easier to balance, and as a way to test all these different functionalities and to test all these different connections, balance, whatnot, gameplay, heat, all these different things. Just let's bring in a variety here, and then in the future we are going to take things to this great place where there's incredible variety in terms of range, heat generation, signature, all that stuff. But for right now, everything's kind of homogenous. Just to keep it, we're keeping things very, very basic to make it easier to test and implement in the game. Well, if that is the legitimate approach, and that's the opinion that CIG has, why aren't we using this approach for many of the other systems in Star Citizen? Arguably, I would say that we would probably be, even with Squadron 42 continuing on, we would be a lot further ahead in Star Citizen if we took the same approach to systems. What if we had just a simple two-dimensional map that we could simply point and click, or just open up a drop-down menu in certain areas and say, this is the destination I want, boom, let's go. Instead of this three-dimensional procedural whatever mess of a map that we've had for years now that really kind of only works when it kind of wants to. What if, in terms of player inventory management, what if we just had the same basic paper doll interface that every MMO since time immemorial has had, and we concentrated more on putting in things like select all of this type, or allowing us to drag a window or, a selecting field over a certain group of items and just say drag and drop over to another inventory the entire batch of things. What if we had more robust sorting features, or the ability to shift click on multiple items, or control click depending, and then just drag them over? Things like this. What if we concentrated on that and it was just a simple two-dimensional interface? It wasn't procedural, it wasn't 3D, it didn't require a special camera that sometimes glitches through walls and then we can't see our character. What if we just did it that way, right? What if we just did it that way for the ease of testing, for the ease of verification, to allow us to look at this very basic thing and then say, this is what we really need to make this work in the context of Star Citizen? What if we took that approach? What if we took that approach to bringing in a UI that allowed us to put NPCs in certain stations in our ship? Now, we know that NPCs are not the greatest pilots and not the greatest gunners, but they're better than nothing. And this would allow us to test and balance and look at what kind of efficacy we want NPCs to have as crew members in the Star Citizen universe. And once we kind of have this all nailed down, then we know. And then we have a better idea going forward of what the balance of something like that should be. This is the approach that we should be taking. The approach that CIG is using in terms of weapons is the approach that we should be taking to all systems in Star Citizen. There's a really great thing going on. I'm sure a lot of you have probably noticed it, where a lot of people are kind of coming back to Star Citizen right now, especially around the anniversary sale, as usually happens. And there's a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of, I want to test this out, I want to try that out. Oh, what's the new ship? Oh, what's the new ship sale? And if we just had some of this connective tissue, it can be in an absolutely bargain basement 2D interface that we can say, much like the weapons, at some point in the future, we're going to make this something really cool, but right now we just need it to work. players who come back for these events, players who come back enthusiastically and excitedly, waiting to engage with Star Citizen, in some cases for the first time, in some cases again, would be greeted by arguably a much superior product than they're being greeted with now. As much as we can kind of harp on Star Citizen for certain things, the fact that the fact that we can have multiple hours of gameplay without being 30K'd or suffering some kind of fatal error and the program closing, compared to what it was when 3.0 first came out, is fantastic. There's a lot of work that has gone into the stability of the game that is apparent. Now, desync is still a huge issue in Star Citizen, probably a lot bigger issue than many people realize, but I would actually argue that if we kind of took this approach to a lot more systems, it would be a lot easier for people to kind of accept the state that Star Citizen is in. If we just took a simple pragmatic approach to things and let's get it in there, verify that it works, maybe explore it a little, see what we really need to touch and tweak and change, and then we can do the big fancy interface. We constantly hear that the UI is always a problem. We want to redo the UI, but we're actually thinking of a whole new system for UI, and so this is going to have to wait for that, and we don't really have the staff to do that until next year or whatever. All these things. But what if there was just, of all the people that we're bringing in, we brought in some people who just focused on implementing basic things in a basic way. It doesn't need to be fancy. It doesn't need to be procedural. We all understand that at some point in the future, it's going to become a much more fancy, cool, procedural, three-dimensional thing. But for right now, this is just for right now. And some people might say, the game will look bad, and the game will... I would argue the game already looks bad, because eventually this kind of shine, this kind of glow that the game has when they first start playing it is going to wear off. And they're going to go, oh man, why can't I do this? Why can't I find a cargo hauler in space and just blow him up and just tractor beam all his cargo in one big gulp? Why don't I have a tractor beam turret on my ship yet? Why can't I salvage with my reclaimer? I would argue that getting those basic functionalities into the game, even in a rough state, is far more beneficial than waiting for a large overarching system that may or may not solve the problem or may actually create more problems in the future. It's better to spend a month, 2 months, 3 months on something to find out that it's actually terrible and you're just going to have to throw it in the bin, rather than spend a year to a year and a half designing a system only to find out the same thing because you spent more time thinking about how to make it look rather than how to make it work.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.